So if you've been following along with Practical Church Planting for any length of time, you know one of the things that we talk about often is how important it is to talk about money often. But you may not know the best ways to go about doing that. And so today on Practical Church Planting, we're going to give you 5 tips for talking about money more often that don't feel forced.
Welcome back to Practical Church Planting, where in 15 minutes or less, we'll give you practical tips, advice, and encouragement to help you plant and grow healthy churches. My name is Brian Androsian. With me today is Dylan Dotson, and today we're talking about 5 ways that you can talk about giving that don't feel forced.
So if you listen to this podcast, watch the videos on Facebook or YouTube, you know we talk about the importance of giving and talk about the importance of talking about giving a lot.
That's right.
And so we want to give you some tips on how you can actually do that. And so here we go in no particular order. Number one of the 5 ways that you can talk about giving that don't feel forced, that doesn't feel awkward to your people is this. Talk about it often. Now, Of course, this is the one we say, so maybe this one doesn't count as much. If you want to know specifically, go back to episode 56, where we give you the reasons why you should talk about it often and how you should talk about it often. But again, we'll just repeat what we often say here, is that if you talk about it often, it doesn't feel awkward when you talk about it.
Yep.
Part of the reason why people say churches talk about money too much is because every time they talk about it, they are awkward or they apologize or they have all these caveats for it. Whereas, and I've said this before, if you asked our people at New City Church if we talk about money a lot, they'd probably be like, no, I don't know. The reality is we talk about it maybe once or twice, if not more, a month in terms of Sundays. I don't know if that makes sense. Once or twice a Sunday, whatever. Once or twice a month, if not more.
Yeah.
A lot of times.
Makes sense.
Money gets in there a lot. And so I would say talk about it often so it's not weird when you talk about it.
Yeah, and I mean, this cures you of doing the whole, like you said, getting up there and being like, well, we got to talk about money today. Right. And it's the most cringy thing that a pastor can say when they get up there and just like give a disclaimer that that I'm sorry that I have to preach this at you.
Right.
It's like you're preaching. There's nothing to apologize for. It's a good thing, and we're going to talk about why it's a good thing in a minute. But if you're talking about it often, then that kind of cures you of feeling you have to apologize for what you're about to preach.
It's nothing worse than like saying, so next week we're talking about this, or today we're talking about this being finances, and like automatically setting people up to be like, ugh.
Oh, man.
But if you instead of say, hey, we're talking about something that's really good for us and for you, just the vibe that you give carries off a lot or comes off very easily to other people. So talk about it often. That's number one. And then it won't feel forced, because you're used to talking about it, and because it's just a normal thing. It's like anything else that you talk and you teach about. Right. Talk about it often. Number 2, always explain why people should give, not just what they should give or how they should give. In other words, you need to. Here's the thing, like it or not, and it's easy for us to like make fun of or look down upon our people. We're the exact same way. The number one thing we are always thinking about is what's in it for me, or how does this impact or affect me? And oftentimes we talk about giving because we say it's the right thing to do and God says to do it. But then people are like, but what does it have to do with me? And so when you talk about giving, you need to explain why they should do it. One of the things I say all the time, we talk about money because it's true. So hopefully, this has to be true for you. You can't fake it. Yeah. Is that I don't care about your money. I care about your heart. And Jesus says the number one indicator of where your heart is how you spend your money. Right. And so we talk about that, or we talk about why, again, another thing we say often because it's true is that if you want to grow closer, the fastest way to grow closer to Jesus is by being more generous, because nothing makes you trust Jesus more than trusting him with your finances. And so we talk about why it's good for them. It allows them to trust Jesus. It allows them to take steps in their faith. Here's why it's not just the right thing to do, but it is good for you to actually do it.
Yeah, I mean, the best way to get past feeling awkward about it is to quote Jesus. Like, it's not your words, it's Jesus' words. He says where your money is, that's where your heart is. Right. And so there's no arguing with it. Right. I mean, you can argue, but this is what it says in the Bible. It doesn't say you need to give your money to the church or you have to give your money to us. Right. It's where your money is, that's where your heart's going to be. So do with that what you will.
And that's a good point, because people don't get mad when Jesus talks about it. They get mad when you talk about it, or the church. And if you say, here's why we're talking about it, because Jesus does. And Jesus also talks about money and resources more than he talks about anything else. So that's also a reason for you to talk about it a lot. Now, I want to be clear here that the reason why people should give can't just be for the church's benefit. Sure. It cannot just be, we need you to give. Why? So we can do more stuff. And so, so the church won't shut its lights off or whatever. Because, that's just like, I get it. Yes, people care about your church. Some people do. But it can't just be for the church. They have to understand why it's good for them, which is why Jesus talks about why it's good for them. Yeah. When he says why you should be generous with your money. And so again, always explain why people should give, what's in it for them, why it's good for them, not just that they should give. Right. And I think you'll see a difference. Again, a lot of times people just say, here's what you should give, and the reason is because God says it. Well, then of course people are going to be kind of put off by that.
Yeah, and if you want to talk just from a financial standpoint, I feel like this is the best way to also create lifelong givers, I guess you could say. Like, you can do a capital campaign and we're raising money for something, and you'll probably get people who've never given who may donate a one-time thing because they see the building's falling apart.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that's going to continue, and that doesn't mean that that's actually where their heart is. They might just get caught up in the moment of whatever. But to actually explain to them why it's good for them, that's how you're going to create someone who actually builds a habit of generosity.
Right. And then they can actually experience how it's good for them in their life, not just you telling them. So that's number 2. Always explain why, not just what or just that they should give. Number 3, encourage people to take steps and do not condemn them for their lack of giving, because that's not going to do anything good for anybody. So I remember at some point last year, I used this example. We're talking about giving. I don't know. The message was all about giving.
Yeah.
And this was not new to me. I'd heard other people say it, and so I just thought it was kind of a normal thing. But I had multiple people come up to me after and be like, I've never heard someone talk about giving that way. And they were like, in a way that they were excited about it. So here's what the thing was. It wasn't new to me. We were talking about generosity, giving. I don't remember what the message exactly was about or why we were talking about it, but we said this. We want everyone to take a next step in their generosity. If you have never given in your life, that is perfectly okay. We want to invite you for the first time to give something, no matter what it is, just to see what God might do, just to take a step. It doesn't even matter if it's $1. Just for the first time in your life, give. If you have given before, but you're super inconsistent, here's what we challenge you to do. For the next 6 months or a year, give, and it doesn't need to be a lot, but give a consistent amount over an X period of time. It could be 1% of your income, 2% of your income. That's going to go way farther than the random $20 or $50 you give every few months because you feel bad or you feel like you should or you realize you haven't, whatever.
Right.
So if you've never given, give once. If you've given before or super sporadically, commit to a small, consistent giving. And if you do give consistently, your next step is to increase it, right? Because Jesus is not asking us to check off a box. He's asking us to grow closer to him, which means our generosity should increase the longer we're following Jesus. So we said things like 0.5 percentage point this year or 1% more of your income. Give that this year. Just take a step. And people were like, I never heard it that way. Or like it was such again, this is not me like coming up with a good idea. I want to be clear on that. But I think it's such a disarming way to look at it. Mm-hmm. That again, Jesus is asking us to take steps. He's not asking us to go from 0 to 10%, which is kind of the standard, what everyone says you should give 10%. If you're not, how dare you? And that's what makes people feel not convicted, but condemned and like a loser and put off, that they give nothing and they're being told it's impossible for most people to do that. It's just not practical, especially if you have a family and kids or you have your own debt from school or whatever. It's really impractical to help make people go from 0 to 10. Mm-hmm. You want people to take steps. And I think if you caveat it that way, you'll see a lot more positive results from your people.
Yeah, I like that you said that, because sometimes we kind of take this for granted if you've been in church for a long time, that you should give, and if you're a 10% person, that you should give 10%. But in reality, if you've never really given to something, to go from nothing to then I need to give away 10% of my income, no matter what you make, that's a big number.
Yep.
And so that takes a conversation with your spouse. That takes figuring out, moving things around. And by that time, most people have forgotten about it.
Yep.
By the time they go through all those. So yeah, just a step of something is better than nothing.
Yep.
Starting in some sort of generosity is a good place to start. So yeah, I remember that message, and it was real good just to encourage people, wherever you are, just take a step forward.
Right. And again, that's what Jesus asked us to do. He doesn't ask us to figure out everything in the beginning. He says, follow me, and as you follow me, he'll change your life and you'll trust him more. And I think if you give it that kind of, hey, if you're new here, you've never given before, let's take a step and just see what God will do.
And to add on to that, I like that you kind of didn't separate people. In other words, you didn't just say, hey, if you haven't given, we really encourage you to start giving. Right. Now let's move on. But it's, if you haven't, this is your next step. If you're inconsistent, here's your next step. If you are consistent, here's your next step. It's not like these people are the worst.
Yeah, there's a different class of people.
Right. It's everybody needs to be growing closer to Jesus.
Yeah, that's a good point. So again, and if you do that, it'll make it less awkward, less condemning. People will be like, no, I can actually do that. And they might be encouraged and excited about actually trying it.
Yeah.
I think going from 0 to 10% is just impractical and not helpful. So that's number 3. Encourage people to take steps. Do not condemn them for their lack of giving. Number 4, celebrate what their generosity has done. There's no better time than to point out when exciting things are happening, to point out that, hey, the reason this happens is because you were generous. So a few weeks ago, we had baptisms on Sunday at both of our services. And we said, This is the big reason this happens is because of what you guys have done. Your guys serving, your guys' giving to make this possible. This is why we give. We don't give to pay the staff salary or to pay for the building. All that stuff is a means to the end, is a means to the mission. We give so that stuff like this will happen. And if you celebrate and remind people that their giving makes the really cool moments happen, that is what will encourage people to continue to give in the future.
Yeah, that's good. And that's not just saying, here's a tangible thing that your money paid for.
Right.
I feel like we all know to do that. If we added an addition to the building, yes, that's exciting. Your money paid for this. But the kind of more spiritual things, the things that we don't really associate with money often,
right,
that all stems back to it too. I mean, all this wouldn't happen if people weren't generous, if people weren't actually participating in the mission. So tying it all into that, I think, is a huge deal.
Again, so if you have baptisms coming up, or you have, anything that you can celebrate. Maybe you had a high attendance Sunday, or you just kicked off community groups, or somebody met Jesus or whatever. Anything that you can share. Maybe if you share a testimony or a testimony video, it's just to remind people, hey, it's your generosity. This is why we're generous. You can remind people that this is why we're generous, and they'll be like, that is why we're generous. It's not for things, it's for people. And so celebrate people's generosity whenever you're celebrating something cool that's happening in your church. People will be more likely to give, and then they'll also be glad to do so because they're like, yes, I played a part in that.
Yeah.
And I would just say real quick with this one, we've shared before, we do this thing called the $5 Give Club. I'm not sure what episode it is, but we actually talk about how we do it, where we invite everyone to give an additional $5 once a month, and then we film a video, and it goes to a nonprofit or a family in our area, and we talk about how to do it in a different episode. But what's funny is I don't know how many episodes. I think we've done this for like 15 months now, a year and a half, something like that. Yeah. And it's grown, and especially the last few weeks, or a few months, it's substantially grown. And what's happened is it's not just that some people give more than $5, which some people do to the Give Club, although we only ask for $5, but more people are giving to it because we're every Sunday of the month that we do the video, we're celebrating. Here's what your generosity did, and that's what people want to give to. So it's just something that we've really learned and seen, that people want to give to something that's making a difference. And so when you can point out a difference that has been made, people will give to it.
Yep, for sure.
So that's number 4, celebrate what their generosity has done. And then number 5, explain the need. Now, what I mean by this is sometimes people don't give because they just don't know there's a need. Now, you have to be careful about this because you can't do this all the time. Yeah. If you do this all the time, it comes across as begging. It comes across as there's always a problem. It comes across as, why don't you have any money for anything? But, for example, and you mentioned this before, sometimes people do capital campaigns or generosity initiatives to get a new building or to expand the building.
Right.
People see an obvious need, you rally around it, and they make it happen. And so sometimes, again, you can't do this all the time because then it just doesn't work, and people don't want to just give to need. They want to give to the mission. They want to see something happening. But they will be more than happy to give to need every once in a while. Just being honest about where you are as a church, I think, might show people their need to give, because a lot of people do want to make a difference. They just feel like there's nothing for them to offer. And if they actually see, oh no, here's specifically what this need is for. I'll give you an example. If you've planted a church, when we planted New City Church, a lot of people gave that weren't part of the church, and that's what happens in church planting, right? People fund something that's going to happen because one of the reasons because there's a very obvious need for it.
Yeah.
As the church becomes more established, people don't assume there's a need, even though there is, so you have to do more work. But when there's a very obvious need, people are more likely to give. And so bringing those to your people's attention will help if you do that every once in a while.
Yeah, and I would say there's definitely a right and a wrong way to bring needs to attention. And I guess the way you put this is not to come across as things are terrible.
Right.
Even if they kind of are. Even if things are rough, people need to see some sort of hope. So even if your church is looking real, has a real tough financial outlook and you're not really sure where things are going to go, it's okay to explain the need that, hey, things need to turn around, but there needs to be some hope in there. You can't just always be doom and gloom, because no one's going to want to show up, to be honest, but give them some hope that we're here for something bigger than the building that we may not be able to afford. We're here for something bigger. However, there's this need.
Right. And I think it's helpful too, especially in times of needs, or just to say in general, to let people know that you value their generosity and that you do and hopefully you do this.
Yeah.
You spend a lot of time and effort making sure that you steward what is given well. So you give people the opportunity to, if they have questions about the budget, to come and ask you about it. Most people won't. Some people might, but even the fact that you say, hey, we're happy to share with you where things are going. If you have any questions, it's like, oh, okay. The fact that they're even allowing me to ask questions means that they're probably they've got a system or a structure. They're not just spending the money wherever it goes.
Yeah, good point.
So again, these are 5 ways to talk about giving that don't feel forced, because it's good to talk about giving. Number 1, talk about it often. Number 2, explain why they should give, not just that they should give. 3, encourage people to take next steps and don't condemn them for their lack of giving. Number 4, celebrate what their generosity has done. And then number 5, explain the need. So thanks for being with us today on Practical Church Planting. As always, you can go to practicalplanting.com/questions if you want us to talk about something in a future episode. And until then, we'll be with you next time on Practical Church Planting. Thanks so much for watching this episode of Practical Church Planting. Whether you're watching on Facebook or YouTube or Practical Planting, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, make sure you like or subscribe or do whatever it's telling you to do or should do on that platform.
And hey, if you are so tired of looking at our ugly faces, but you're not tired of listening to our beautiful voices, then you can find our podcast if you just search Practical Church Planting on iTunes or Google Play. Make sure not to just find it, not just to listen, but to subscribe.
Make sure you subscribe. Brian, tell them to subscribe.
Subscribe.
See you next time.